In this video, we are going to talk about the concept of lawful and legal conduct and enforcement. Within the context of the unlawful visa enforcement and system, the obstruction of U.S. children in entering the country, which could relate to child trafficking. And this, of course, is in relation to airlines, airports, and immigration, which facilitate all of these unlawful acts, conduct, illegal conduct as well, and of course child trafficking, which the way that this system operates puts into context how it facilitates child trafficking, because it makes virtually anything else beyond that difficult. And this, of course, is in opposition to the idea of constitutional immigration, the supreme law of the United States, and because most of the individuals that are occupying these positions are not legitimate, they are in fact pretending at power. In an earlier video, I talked about the visa system and its practical application, what it's intended for, and where the evidence of that is. Briefly covering that video, it talked about how the visa system is used to bring in a force of foreigners, specifically to violate the Constitution, and the visa is used as a leash to enforce behavior over the people brought in. It is an evil system, but it also facilitates child trafficking. Now, I've had my own experiences with this, but it's very simple in the fact that the visa system facilitates the ability to abandon one's own family, especially when it comes to young couples, and it makes it incredibly difficult for families to stay together. And one of the ways that it does this is through the need for parent signatures. Of course, it is listed as parent or guardian signatures, and here's where we get into the rabbit hole of the immigration and how it works. Let's say you have a father who's a U.S. citizen and a mother who's a foreigner, and then they have a child, and then the father imparts U.S. citizenship onto that child. Well, that child cannot travel without their parents and cannot re-enter the U.S. without their parents. If the father takes the child to the border, then border security or port security, depending on which place they enter from, land port or a seaport as they like to list them. If the father takes the child there, then they're going to ask for the signature of the mother. And if the mother does not want to give her signature, then the child cannot enter the United States. And the same goes for the mother. If the mother seeks to take the child out of the country that the parents are currently in, she will need the signature of the father. And of course, they always list this as guardian, parent or guardian. And so here's where you get these institutions that, because they've set up the system to be impossible for families to travel together, families will give up their children to adoption in other places because it becomes economically impossible to remain in certain countries, especially when you need to have worker visas and you have all these threats and coercion and whatnot. And in this easy and basic sense, to understand at least, they facilitate child trafficking so that they can get parents to give up their children, because they have implemented these unlawful visa systems based off of UN law. Now we get into the realm of why it is unlawful. First, according to the Constitution, it is the supreme law as far as the U.S. is concerned. It is not to be put below international treaties nor the law of the UN. So why would refugees need to request permission from the UN in order to enter the United States? Because the visa system is a United Nations law. It's an international treaty structure. It is not constitutional. And if you go to the Constitution, it specifically stipulates how foreigners are supposed to in fact be treated, and it only says that Congress specifically has the ability, or is charged with, not has the ability, has charged with creating a uniform system of naturalization. And it says nothing about travel or visitation or transit or any of these things. It says nothing about that. It only says naturalization. That's, of course, relating to people who have been in the United States who want to become U.S. citizens, or perhaps are not in the United States, but they want to become U.S. citizens. And everything else is left up to the people or the states respectively. And of course, that is not going on because you have a lot of authoritarian pretenders who are pretending to be legitimate constitutional forces, and they're not. They are not abiding by the Constitution, which makes them criminals, and in some cases, traitors. Either way, this and many other examples and concepts let us know just what the visa system is for and how it's fraudulent, and how their rhetoric is constantly built around the protection of this system. It's not just about business, because the visa system is about business, but it's not only about it. It's also about a transit monopoly and controlling the passage of human beings and ensuring that people that do travel are constantly kept on a leash so that there's no real freedom and there's no liberty. And there's nothing that the Constitution was specifically written to guard for the people. And then, if we get into constitutional immigration, that should be something left up to each individual state or each individual U.S. citizen. In fact, myself, I have far more authority than most of these people who are practically using superior force enforcing unlawful acts in the name of the Constitution, whereas I'm actually a constitutional authority myself, having sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution in the document. In that document, it states that all executive, not some, all executive officers and judicial officers have to swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, otherwise they're not legitimate officers, executive, judicial, or otherwise. Well, it just does specifically state executive and judicial. So these people that are pretending to operate under the constitutionality, regardless of whatever excuses they made, if they haven't sworn oath to the Constitution, they're not. One, and then two, if they're not following the Constitution, they're foreign occupiers and they're violating the law and they're criminals. In practice, literally. And there's a lot of traditionally and customary ways that people like border security, so-called, and all of these people that are enforcing these UN laws in a superior position to the Constitution, there are ways that these people have been dealt with in the past, and it's usually not very nice. And which is probably one of the reasons why a lot of them act so aggressively, because they are in fact afraid of what they're doing. And then this, of course, gets in the idea of them pretending at power. You see, they always say these things like the Constitution does not apply to foreigners. Well, if that were true, then the Constitution would not specifically state how foreigners are supposed to be treated, so that these people cannot abuse foreigners in the way they do. It is specifically stated in the Constitution, which means it actually does apply to foreigners, and it's the supreme law of the land. And then, of course, the other thing that they fall back on is, oh, well, they're not obstructing U.S. citizens specifically from entering the country. Well, they are obstructing U.S. citizen children, and the U.S. citizen children don't have a voice to speak for themselves. And they are obstructing families from staying together, from entering together into the United States. And they put all of these ridiculous and arbitrary paperwork, rabbit holes, and this system is designed for a transit monopoly, but also enslavement and action and whatnot. So it's an interesting concept to look at this travel and immigration system and how it is globally structured as a copy of itself, because it's a UN structure. It's not specifically US, it's international, and it comes to the United Nations. And it's all geared towards the benefit and design of the United Nations. And so, in order for things to get better, first, these pretenders to power and those that claim to be lawful authorities will need to be identified for what they really are, which is frauds. They are lying. They're pretending to be authorities when in fact they haven't done any of the things that need to be done. They haven't been elected. They haven't been appointed. They might have been hired, but they never swore oaths to the Constitution. And the Constitution itself stipulates that these individuals cannot exist. And the Congress that put them in power before, first of all, wasn't legitimate. Second, full of traitors. And then third, they put in something into place that is not constitutional and violates it. Now, I'm going to talk about my own experience with international travel, specifically from 2020 to now. So for some context, everything locked down in Ohio, where I was living in 2020, in, I believe, March 14th. And the airports shut down. And it is commonly known that it's very difficult to get reimbursed, if not impossible. So I was not reimbursed for the flights that I had purchased in planned trips. But either way, I had planned to leave for Ecuador in April, and so I couldn't do that. And I left for Ecuador in December of 2020. And everything went pretty much normally. However, it was interesting because I knew we had left the United States because there was a complete and perceived change in the manner of the flight attendants. The flight attendants became far more direct, more demanding, and it was almost like I was an employee of them. They were not an employee of me for paying for the flight. So that was interesting. And then I arrived in Quito, Ecuador, and everything was about standard with all the over-the-top COVID precautions and whatnot, and excuses to establish control, or more control. Not that they don't already have had a lot of control already, but either way. Now, in Ecuador, while there, I went to the immigration office, and I was told that there was a waiver extension for people who surpassed their visa time limit, which is a tourist visa of 90 days. And so I wasn't really worried about that. Either way, though, I did plan to leave Ecuador before my visa was up, and actually about the end of it, surprisingly. And I booked a flight through Spirit Airlines that was supposed to do a connecting flight through Miami. And then I was traveling with two Ecuadorian ladies, one of which now has given birth to my daughter. And so we went to the airport in Guayaquil, and then I found out that allegedly, according to the gate worker, they would need a transit visa, and he stated that basically we couldn't board the plane because it might be turned back by authorities in the United States for the lack of transit visas for the two ladies, and we had planned on flying through Miami and then arriving in Cancun because it's something like $200 or $300 cheaper. So here you have an example of a airline worker, not a government agent, not elected, and didn't swear an oath to the Constitution, as the Constitution of the United States says all executive and judicial officers have. He is the one enforcing the visa laws on behalf of the United States. And I have personally far more authority to enforce those types of things, considering I have sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. However, the visa laws are unconstitutional, so I would never enforce them. And that's probably the reason why I'm not in any position to do so. Either way, once we were turned away, I couldn't get my money back from the flights, and so we decided to go with a different airline called Copa, and we were going to fly through Panama to arrive in Cancun. And so we went back to the airport, and because of the debacle with the Spirit Airlines, I ended up overstaying my visa by 2 days. And then, shockingly, the ladies that were running the airline employees, they wouldn't allow us to board, for the first reason being that we had not arrived 3 hours early for the flight, which was ludicrous. We had arrived something like 2 hours and 50 something minutes, So not a huge difference, but either way, they were attempting to keep us from boarding because of a 3 hour mark arbitrarily placed. And that didn't work. So the next thing they surprisingly went after was the fact that I didn't have a visa already approved with Mexico, and that the flight might again be turned back. And so they didn't want us to board because of that, and so we had to argue with them for a while about how that wasn't going to happen. And finally, they attempted to use my 2-day overstay to obstruct me from leaving Ecuador, which was very strange. So they ended up fining me, and I still haven't paid it, nor am I ever going to pay that fine. Either way, we finally left Ecuador, or at least, not yet. You see that the experience persisted because when we got to the airport, or to the plane, when we boarded the plane, and we were on the plane, one of the airline workers came and started ordering my fiance, mother of my child, to get off the plane and to run to her luggage so that they could open it and inspect what's inside. But the manner that this was done was the height of unprofessionalism, and it was behavior that you would expect from somebody who carries a gun, as a lot of people that talk to others like that might end up getting knocked in the face or something. So that was interesting. Then we got to the Panama airport in Panama City, and one of the airport workers directed us to the wrong gate. And the gate that she directed to us to for the connecting flight was on the other side of the airport in a section that was completely inoperational for flights because they were doing COVID testing there. And fortunately, I had looked up at the board and seen where the real gate was, and so we ended up going there and making it to our connecting flight. But otherwise, we'd have lost it if I hadn't done that and mistrusted what had been history with these airport and flight workers. And this is, of course, is an example of two different countries doing a similar thing. People in two different countries, similar things. And then we get to the Cancun airport, and surprisingly, the only people we ever met who were wearing government uniforms, the immigration people through the airport, they did not give us any trouble. They were the only ones that didn't give us any trouble. Then we had to go find the Uber place for the airport in Cancun, and one of the airport workers told us the wrong location. So we went there, and it was off in the middle of nowhere, very hard to find, and so we ended up having to find it ourselves, and walked around the airport for something about 2 hours or so, and it's pretty hot. Cancun's hot, so that was an interesting experience. And then, after our daughter was born in Cancun, we went to immigration, and the adventures continued. At the immigration office in Cancun, we had to wait about a month each time that we scheduled a visit, and we went about 5 times. The first time we went was to get information, and then the second time we went was because we had paid a fine so that we could make regular, or it's regularizar. It's kind of a weird. Either way, we have had to pay the fee for overstaying the visa and figure out how to navigate that, and then we could talk about getting a visa, permanent stay visa. Now, the first time we were given a thing that we were supposed to pay, or at least with the information that we were told originally, we were told we had to schedule an appointment, and so we scheduled the appointment, we came back, and that appointment was for information, so that's 2 times we went there. The second appointment, which we'd scheduled online, we were told we had to pay a fee to get the paperwork processed. Not even the fine or anything, that was later. You have to pay the fine later, and then application fee for the visa itself is what we were told. And so to pay this paperwork processing fee, we went to their bank that they sent us to and paid it. And then when we waited another month after scheduling, we went back and found out the fee had been raised. And so we had to go pay that raised percentage of the fee and schedule another appointment. And then the next time that we scheduled the appointment and arrived, the fee had changed again. And so finally we realized that this was never going to happen. Now, this is in contrast to a similar situation, or not similar, but also odd, And that was when I went to the consulate in Merida to file for citizenship paperwork for my daughter. Now, the first thing I noticed when I got there is that there were no U.S. citizens in sight anywhere operating this embassy. Security was provided by what appeared to be local security guards. Obviously not lawful executives of the U.S. Constitution having sworn an oath, and not U.S. Marines, as is commonly perceived to be the case with consulates and embassies that are supposed to be operated by U.S. Marines. Instead, these are local security guards, it appears, all wearing uniforms that are not Marine Corps. Either way, we get inside, and the paperwork is processed by two people. First, the one guy, not a U.S. citizen, has an accent. And then the lady is from London, not the United States. Now, she did state that her husband was a U.S. citizen and had served in the military, but I don't believe that. Either way, there were no U.S. citizens operating the consulate. And the one guy grilled me about my military service, and of course I did not give him any information because that would be inane, regardless of constitute myself committing crimes that could be prosecuted under the UCMJ and whatnot. So no, I didn't give him any information, but he did grill me about it in a very unprofessional and yelling manner, which was interesting. And I expected that if I had responded, he would have used that response as a pretext to withhold the citizenship paperwork for my daughter. So that's an interesting situation there. And all of this comes into context when we realize that the airports, the airlines, and the governments, and the consulates and embassies, and all of these different institutions, they're all enforcing UN laws, not the Constitution of the United States. And as far as the Constitution is concerned in the United States, it is the supreme law, meaning it is above treaties and it is above UN laws. And you have low-level workers enforcing these fraudulent laws. And then you have foreigners, a U.S. consulate completely staffed with foreigners enforcing things in relation to U.S. citizens. And if a person can't see the problem with that, that's just, it's something else. It's a very weird situation. So I expect a lot of it had to do with the excuse of COVID to establish this sort of rampant UN control and ignorance of true law. And essentially all of these people are fraudulent pretenders acting out crimes, essentially, because the idea of a pretender is somebody who doesn't actually have authority but is pretending to have that authority. And that's what we find here. You have all of these self-appointed and in some cases corporate-appointed officials that are enforcing whichever law they are told to or that they themselves deem fit, and they are in themselves are not obeying the true legitimate laws, and they are also abusing people and doing all these other things. Of course, you cannot reason with any of these individuals. They are extremely rigid and you have to do everything that they say, otherwise they will coerce your behavior with the threat of force, arms, or with withholding whatever it is you went there to do. Possibly with the airlines, I've heard that people have been stranded there for days, even weeks, because of paperwork, which is of course ridiculous. But that was not my experience, fortunately. And then this is a lot like the idea of whack-a-mole, and that game where you hit a mole and it pops up somewhere else. Similar to the circumstance with government agencies and social media companies, where all of these government workers get fired and then they all pop up in the executive positions and high-level positions at social media companies and get right back to doing what they were doing before, fraudulently in the government agencies, and carrying out warlike efforts against the citizens and the people that live in these places. It's a lot like a parasite infestation, you can imagine, because these people are coming into these positions in good faith and the position is made to serve, and instead they're doing the opposite, and they're being paid salaries in order to do pretty much the opposite of what they're supposed to, which is it's a lot like a parasite. And they're killing companies, and they're killing organizations, and they're killing the law also with this type of behavior. But it's certainly interesting. Anyway, that is my own personal experience, and I'm sure many have similar experiences when it comes to travel, especially post-COVID. And it would be interesting to hear about some of the other experiences that people have had in this context. But either way, I hope that gives a good understanding of the situation and how, practically speaking, the UN transit monopoly operates. Thank you, and if you enjoyed this content, please like this video, share it, and of course subscribe to my channels, and stay tuned for the next one.